going to say is they have open markets. Open markets. The United States has never had open markets. In fact, if you look at the Western European powers in order, if you look at, let's say, Portugal, Spain, Holland, France, England, how did every single one of them come to strengthen their economy? United States also. By closing their markets, by protecting their markets. And the United States is still doing this. The United States still does this with iron. So the whole idea of capitalism being typified by open markets is a fallacy. It's not true. Another thing they say, private ownership of business. That is not a defining characteristic of capitalism. All right. They say that to distinguish themselves from supposed communist economies, but it is not a defining characteristic. So if you look at the history of capitalistic societies, what is it that they all have in common? Well, they are all dominated by capitalists. We cannot talk about capitalism without talking about the character and the mindset of the individuals who control that society. The capitalists. What typifies the capitalist? A myopic pursuit of wealth, continuously renewed wealth. When I say myopic, I mean in the sense of the disease, myopia, tunnel vision, narrow-minded, amoral. Amoral, meaning they don't recognize the difference between right and wrong. They may know the difference between right and wrong, but it's not worth recognizing. It is not going to impact the decisions that they make. What impacts the decisions that they make? The goal of renewed wealth. So then how do you define a capitalist society? A society controlled by these types of individuals. So where did it begin? Capitalism as we know it, and enslavement of Africans on plantations, sugar plantations and things of that nature, began in the Mediterranean. In the Mediterranean. Do y'all remember a play? I'm sure y'all probably had to read it in middle school or high school or something like that, called The Merchant of Venice, right? And what was his situation? All of his money was tied up in what? Overseas ventures. And this, what it was like to be a merchant in Venice. And we're talking about 13th, 14th, even 15th century, the most dominant individuals throughout the Mediterranean Sea, because they are controlling trade throughout the Mediterranean. And they were able to establish these sugar plantations in the Mediterranean, in Crete and Cyprus, which I pointed out to you earlier. Now, the sugar plantations, the sugar that they're producing is being sold in Europe. And they grow incredibly rich. They are not really thinking about who they have to force into slavery on these plantations. They're not racist. They're not saying we hate black people or we hate Asian people. They're thinking about self. They're thinking about money. They're thinking about their own pocketbook. They'll enslave anybody that they think can make a profit for them. And that's what they did. First, now the Mongol Empire, historically speaking, was the world's largest empire if we're talking about geographical territory. But the Mongol Empire had a collapse at the end of the 14th century. That collapse created a power vacuum. It created fragmentation and weaknesses in the areas formerly under the Mongols' control. The Crusades, the conflict between the Christians and Muslims that lasted for centuries. Now, if you look at the plantations, the Venetian plantations in Crete and Cyprus, they're people of all phenotypes and people of all religions. They're looking for weak people. They're looking for vulnerable people, I should say. That's what's really going on at this point. The whole idea of race is not a major influential factor. But we have to really look at the big picture and see what is really transpiring. What is transpiring is that you have an empowered class that is amoral. Amoral. You cannot exclude discussion of morality from the discussion of the Ma'afa. And we cannot exclude the discussion of morality from our plight as a collective. Also, one other thing, and this is how Africans came to be caught up in this particular situation. This is how Africans came to be forced into slavery on plantations controlled by capitalism. And that is by way of trans-Saharan trade. Now, who's controlling trans-Saharan trade? Not people that look like me and you. The people that are controlling trans-Saharan trade, once again, are Arab people. So I think for us here in the West, we know, we have a good idea of the part that Christianity has played in our destruction. But we can't stop with Christianity. We have to understand the part that Islam has played in the destruction of Mother Africa and all of her children. I want to point out Crete and Cyprus again. Here's Crete, Cyprus, and Venice up here in the Adriatic Sea, Venice. The trans-Saharan trade has various routes throughout northern Africa. Y'all follow me? The whole idea of sugar producing plantation moved away from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. It did not simply begin in the Atlantic. That mindset, that capitalist mindset, this idea that I can dehumanize people, even though that may not be my goal, but if I do, it's okay. The question is, how much profit am I going to acquire by doing this? It moved from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, from one body of water to another, kind of like a cancer spreading. That's exactly what it was like. And they began to settle islands along the coast of Africa. Sao Tome, Fernando Po, etc. These are all islands along the coast of West Africa, right? Uninhabited, but they forced Africans from the mainland, the Africans that they kidnapped, forced them from the mainland to these plantations to produce things like wine and sugar. And you'll see throughout the course of our history, first, there's force to subjugate Africans, right? To subordinate us. Force, and then the control of our labor, and ultimately the control of our minds, and that's kind of where we are today.
Learn the secrets that were excluded from your history books. Join the Kemet 101 educational tour to Egypt with Dr. Perry Kiles. Explore inside the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Walk in the path of the ingenious Lady Pharaoh Hatshepsut and the brave warrior Ramses II. Experience this archaeological journey and spiritual retreat. Click the link in the description box and join our next Kemet 101 educational tour.